And we are live. Hello everyone, glad you can join me here again today. As you can see, there's something a little bit different about this video. We have a little paint thing over here. We have a paint window. And so if you've been following me on Periscope, then this is going to be something brand new. If you're following me on YouTube, this is going to be something brand new because this is my first Twitch stream and we're trying this out. So as I said in the beginning of my videos, one of the things that I'm big on is iterate and improve. And so we're going to try and iterate and improve on the show by going to Twitch. And the reason why I'm going to Twitch is because I now have the ability to have a window and to show you something, so I don't need to write something on a piece of paper and try and hold it up to the camera and show you guys. I can just show you right in a window. So again, I'm happy you all can join me. And I wanted to try a first Twitch stream before we got to the Andrew Yang, Ben Shapiro video, because that one I'm really excited for, and I would like to be able to show clips while I'm analyzing it and experience it along with you guys. So if you're here, welcome, welcome. And let's get started. No yerba today. Yerba mate. We'll see next time. Next time I'll bring the bay. Anyway, enough nonsense. Let's get to the video. So, I was thinking a lot about, and I have been thinking a lot about, AI, automation, and robots, and how that's going to shape our economy. But there is another aspect that is going to, I think, provide a lot of economic value, and it's going to be the next. Think about the gold rush in 1849. It's going to be the next big economic revolution. Not that the gold rush was, but it's going to be one of the biggest economic revolutions in human history. And that is outer space. Because we all want to go to outer space, right, as a society. We like to be able to go into space. We like the idea of all the scientific achievements that will come from being in outer space, all the exploration, the space cowboy stuff. That's very exciting stuff, and we would love to be able to take advantage of it. But the problem is that it's very hard to get into space, and it's not very economical. So it's hard and it costs a lot of money. But if we can find different ways of making money in outer space, then we're going to be unlocking a lot of economic value and also providing a big economic incentive for people to go into space. So once you provide the economic incentives, then private companies are going to do everything they can to get to space first so they can unlock all the value and plant their flag there first and get all that money that they want so badly. And so I wanted to talk about a few different ways that companies could make money in space, and maybe a few ways that people haven't thought of, or different things that people may not be paying attention to. And I can show you here with the paint, and I can draw out the graphs, and it'll be fantastic. So as you see here, we have Earth. And around Earth we have, I'm going to call it our low Earth orbit. And this is going to be one of the first areas that we can get economic value. There it is, low Earth orbit. I hope you can read that. It's actually slightly better than my actual handwriting, believe it or not. No, I don't know. It's pretty close. But anyway, so we have low Earth orbit. And so this is going to be one of the first places that we can get economic value. And just a quick note, we love the idea of having NASA go into space, right? We all like NASA. But one of the problems that NASA has is that it is a government agency. So NASA doesn't have complete control over their own programs. They can't really decide how to do things and when to do things because their operations are reliant on funding from Congress. So when Congress has control over the money, they have control over the programs and how those programs are done. So a lot of the things that NASA would like to do, they can't necessarily do, or they can't do it the way they want to because they don't have the economic freedom that a private corporation has. So if we're able to find avenues for private corporations to make money in space, once you provide the incentive, the corporations will find a way up there. And we can talk about SpaceX and United Launch Alliance and a few of the other companies that are already trying to get into space and having some operations in space. But I want to talk about one of the first and one of the easiest and one of the already operational areas of space economics, and that is here in low Earth orbit. Here in low Earth orbit, we can see a lot of economic value already being provided by the use of satellites. So satellites can provide us with things like mapping technology as well as communications, and there's different satellites. There's satellites that give us rough estimates of what the picture is on the ground. There's satellites that give us really precise pictures of what's happening on the ground. And eventually we're going to see, my prediction, eventually we're going to see a situation where there's enough satellites in low Earth orbit that we're able to have a live picture of every location on Earth. And that's going to unlock a lot of tremendous value for not only for data analytics. So say there's a company that wants to see how many trees are in a certain area, something like that. But also companies like Uber and Google Maps that are able to map traffic in real time, and they're able to use that technology for self-driving cars. If they have a live interface, a live picture of every single location on Earth, what about Kessler syndrome? Wouldn't more satellites, wouldn't you exponentially increase the effect? So we'll talk about some of the problems in a second, but one of the things with space economics is the more satellites you have, the more economic potential there is to add value. And that's a good question, and we'll get into that. But low Earth orbit is a tremendous area of value for environmental info, data analytics, mapping. And once you have that live feed, that's going to unlock a lot of possibilities here on Earth too, in the form of startups and different technology places. So we have low Earth orbit, and that'll be one of the first places that we get economic value. But this is the exciting part. And let's use this purple. So here's the exciting part. Once you get out and we start talking about the moon, we'll use gray for the moon. So we have the moon. So in between low Earth orbit and the moon, that's really where there's a lot of economic value. And I wanted to think of economic value opportunities that didn't rely on space tourism. And the reason is because space tourism is it's a difficult industry to make a whole bunch of money in, because it doesn't fundamentally answer these two things that you look for in startups. And when you look for a startup, you want them to be able to do these two things. You want them to be able to answer a problem these two ways. You want them to answer the a frequency problem and an urgency problem. So frequency and urgency. And space tourism isn't exactly a very urgent problem that needs to be fulfilled. Now, it's a nice problem. It's a nice luxury if you're able to get into space and explore, but it's not necessarily urgent in that people need to get into space right now. You want the problem to be urgent enough that people are willing to even use a bad version of your product. And it's not really too clear that people would want a bad experience in space, or that you could even do it in a poor way that's also safe. So urgency is one of the problems that space tourism would suffer from, as well as frequency. So frequency is going to be an issue because to get into space, at least in the very beginning, is going to be rather expensive. So who's going to be going into space for space tourism? It's going to be rich people. And how often are rich people going to be wanting to go into space? Once a year? Once every 6 months? It's not entirely clear if there's actually a problem there that has a big frequency and urgency calculus that works out economically. So it'd be tough to make a whole bunch of money doing space tourism, I think, for those two problems. And those are the two problems that Y Combinator talks about when they look at for startups. Is it a problem that meets those two criteria? But space tourism, of course, is going to be a big, big industry. And people eventually, as the costs go down, are going to be wanting to go into space just to check it out, right? So what else can we find besides just straight up space tourism? Well, the moon is going to be one of the most economically valuable pieces of real estate in the not so distant future. And the reason is because the moon is going to serve as a base of operations for all of our space activities going forward. So there's going to be a lot of economic value, number one, right here, in this back and forth with the moon. One of the things that make it so hard to get to the moon and back is that there's no standardized way of doing that yet. There's no acceptable standards and practices. There's no easy way to get back and forth. And getting back and forth is a really big challenge. NASA is trying to get back to the moon. I believe it's by 2025. And again, we talked about some of the problems with NASA being a government agency. The fact that they have so much bureaucracy means that the plans that they have aren't necessarily the best plans, and they can't iterate and improve on the plans because these plans are being told to them by people in Congress. And as far as I know, there aren't too many people in Congress who are aerospace engineers. Are there any? If there are, I'm not sure of any, but that's one of the issues that you have when Congress is trying to dictate what's going on. But if you have private companies who are able to establish a standardized way of getting from the Earth to the moon, you'll have one of the most valuable transportation routes in maybe ever, because the moon is going to serve as a base of operations for all things going forward, because it's much easier to get from the moon to anywhere else in space than it is from Earth. The moon has a lot less gravity, it takes a lot less fuel to launch from the moon, so going from the moon out into space is going to be really super duper easy, and probably the way that it has to happen in the future. And so once you have a centralization of people on the moon, you're going to have shops opening up, you're going to have a lot of industry happening, you're going to have people taking objects from outer space, bringing them to the moon, and then getting them ready to ship to Earth, so that you really don't have to worry about Earth re-entry. You just have to worry about getting whatever it is to the moon, where there's a lot less gravity, there's going to be robots there, and it's going to be an easier industrial zone to deal with really big objects and those types of things once you get to the moon. And then you can figure out how to get it to Earth. But the moon is going to be really, really important. And this transportation right here, bang, 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 is going to become one of the most valuable back and forth routes in history. So you see I have these circles down here. What are these circles? These are asteroids. Asteroids themselves have a lot of economic value waiting to be unlocked, and a lot of scientific discovery things waiting to be unlocked too, but they can contain some rare earth materials, things that are just really hard to find on Earth. But it's also probably good for the security of our planet if we know how to deal with asteroids. Because if one starts coming our way, we want to be able to know what to do with it, right? So being able to mine these asteroids for all the different materials and then bring them to the moon is going to be another possible economic way of value. Whether it's you're mining the materials and then bringing them to the moon, or even potentially just bringing a whole asteroid there, I don't know. We'll see what the market decides is the best way to go forward. Probably not a good idea to have asteroids hurtling towards the moon, but if you can do it in a controlled way, there's going to be a lot of economic value there as well, just because of the materials. Also, if the asteroids have a bunch of water on them, then that's going to be very valuable as well, because water can essentially be turned into rocket fuel, because it's hydrogen and oxygen, and those are basic rocket fuel ingredients. So there might be no water on the moon. I assume there's no water, but if you could get it from the asteroids, it would be a lot easier if you had an easy asteroid capture system to bring it to the moon, to then use that as rocket fuel and use that water, than it is to bring water up from Earth. Because water is heavy, and it's hard to bring a bunch of water up from Earth. It's one of the biggest weight problems, because water's heavy. It's just one of the biggest things that cause a bunch of weight on the spaceship, because humans need water. So trying to bring up that amount of weight from from Earth to outer space is a rather difficult thing to do. Getting them from asteroids is going to be very valuable, not only for the mining, again, but also for the rocket fuel, etc., etc. But there's also going to be another $1 trillion coming, and I'll show you where. It's going to be over here. Mars. And Mars is going to be very valuable, not only for space exploration and scientific exploration purposes, but there's water there, there's who knows what else, different minerals and materials. Getting to Mars is going to be something that's going to provide a lot of value. And in fact, if it was easy to get to Mars, so this is going to be a bit further out. I don't know if it's within our lifetime, but it probably will be. It'll be within Elon Musk's lifetime. But if we can get to Mars and say we are able to start doing industrial type things there, or we're able to do industrial type things here on the asteroids, you can imagine a scenario in the medium future, so not necessarily short term, but not long term either. But you can imagine a scenario in the medium term future where most of our industrial happenings are happening off the Earth. So the Earth might be in the future just zoned for residential. People could just live on Earth and then work in outer space, and most of the things that we have to produce as far as raw materials might be happening in outer space for raw, basic materials. Obviously things will still be produced on Earth, but it might look very different, and most of the materials that we gather might be happening off planet, especially things that are rather dirty. I don't know if you want to do nuclear testing on the moon, but you want to do nuclear testing in the future, probably somewhere off the Earth, if that's possible. Wouldn't it be great to be able to test nukes and not have to worry about if that's going to impact the Earth negatively? Being able to do that sort of thing off planet is going to be very valuable. So Mars is going to provide a lot of value, but the moon here is probably going to be the big driver. So being able to get back and forth from the moon and have operations stationed on the moon, there's also going to be a big real estate play there. So one economic viable idea might just be to get to the moon and then just build structures and build research facilities. And then if you can shuttle people back and forth, you're just charging rent, just like a landlord would. So the moon's going to have a lot of real estate opportunities. And a lot of this may not seem too significant, but this is really sort of the precursors for very valuable and viable and sustainable types of economy. Once you have a transportation system in place and you have the ability to build real estate on a certain planet or on the moon or on Mars or even on asteroids, whatever it is you want, once you have that ability, then you're able to unlock a lot of different economic opportunities, and getting into space is going to serve as an economic multiplier. So we won't even necessarily know all the different ways that we can unlock value, but once we have these simple ingredients, we're going to see a big, massive explosion. And once we start thinking about space as an economically viable option, we're going to see a lot more space exploration. But there is a big problem with this. The big problem is that this is actually all illegal. It's actually illegal via international treaty to go to the moon and build real estate and then rent it out, because all of this, according to the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, everything that you do in space and all the things that you capture, it's all the common heritage of mankind. So it's not exactly quite clear that any of this would be legal. It's not entirely clear that you could go into space as a private corporation and then do stuff that is going to be economically valuable without it having to be divvied up with everyone else, without you having to share your proprietary information and all your intellectual property. All of that's going to have to be sorted out. And so when we talk about space economics, and if you're wanting to get into this sort of field, you're really going to need expertise or at least some background knowledge in, I believe, these three areas. And the first one's going to be economics. Obviously, you need to know how money works and how to operate with money, how to start businesses, how economics work on both a micro and a macro scale, because you're going to want to know how that's going to operate and how that's going to work with large scale, countrywide types of economic systems, especially when you're talking about rare earth materials. And when you bring your rare earth materials back, who do you pay taxes to? Is it the country of origin? Is it going to be where you land? There's a lot of different questions that you're going to need to sort out. Which leads me to the next area, which is public policy, because you're going to need to sort out all the different legal issues that are going to arise, especially when it comes to, does my building exist as an American corporation? Is this going to exist as a common heritage of mankind where I have to be subject to a whole bunch of different countries' rules? Why should I be subject to American regulations when I'm not even in America, etc., etc.? So there's a bunch of public policy problems that come with space economics that you would have to be rather well versed in, or you would have to address these problems before you're able to confidently operate in outer space. And one of the things that companies hate more than anything is uncertainty, especially when they're investing millions and millions and billions of dollars. So public policy is going to be a big sense of uncertainty. And the other one is going to be startups and entrepreneurship, because a lot of this might come from startup-led companies. Companies that start with just an idea and then they scale up and they start from nothing and get to something. Because a lot of the space operations that we see now, they aren't done by startups so much as they are done by people who already are pretty rich. So someone like Elon Musk, who's a billionaire prior to starting SpaceX. I'm not sure if he was a billionaire, but he was pretty rich. And you need this market to be accessible to the startup industry, because startups are one of the best ways that you can lower cost. If you can get startups involved to lower the cost and to increase efficiencies in all these different areas, then you're going to have something that's going to be much more economically viable, much more economically valuable, and it's going to iterate and improve at a quicker rate. So with those three areas, if you have background knowledge in those three areas, thinking about space economics is going to be something that's very exciting, because there's a tremendous amount of value that's to be unlocked between here and the low Earth orbit, with more satellites that have live imaging capabilities, and with this transportation thing here with the moon, being able to get back and forth from the moon and being able to build facilities here on the moon, because the moon's going to serve as a base of operations for all future space endeavors. And then Mars. And Mars is sort of a big question mark as to what of economic value is going to be there, but we know something's going to be there. We know that there's at least water. There's rumors that there's rare earth materials that you can mine and different things that are going to be very valuable going forward. So getting to Mars is going to be very exciting. That might be $1 trillion in and of itself. I mean, it's a planet. You can do whatever you want. You can build whatever you want. There's tons of space. There's really little you can do. Little you can't do, sorry. And of course, these asteroids are going to be providing a lot of economic value as well. Whoever can create the asteroid capture ability to be able to capture these asteroids and then bring them to the moon and unlock value in mine. Some of these asteroids are big enough. You think asteroid, you think of these small things that are flying through space, like in Star Wars, that you have to constantly dodge and hopefully they don't hit you. But some of these asteroids are really big, big enough that you can mine on them. So you can bring a whole bunch of infrastructure down there, big old mining rigs, mine your heart out, take a payload back to the moon. But the moon here is just going to be so key and critical. That's not a $. Let's do one of these, and then we'll do one of the, oh, nope, not there. Right here. Bang. And then we'll make it green, just to signify money. Is that a $? It's late. Anyway, so you'll be able to get a bunch of money there on the moon. But that is my idea of the next $1 trillion economy, and that is space economics. And this is the first foray into the Twitch world. So I wanted to talk about something that was different from what it is I normally talk about. For the Twitch viewers that are watching, normally I'm doing political analysis, and I'm talking about Andrew Yang, and I'm talking about different things with marketing and advertisement and different branding strategies and all that sort of fun stuff. But I wanted to talk about this one because it's a pretty fun topic, and I'm glad you could join me. As far as the with more satellites, when you exponentially increase the effect, when you talk about especially space, but when you talk about any sort of new industry, There's going to be a bunch of problems that we know, there's going to be a bunch of problems that we don't know. And the key with any sort of problem, not just those, but the key with any sort of problem is being able to iterate and improve on the problem. So eventually, using human ingenuity, any problem that you can test solutions, find what works, keep doing that, find what doesn't work and discard it. If you can iterate and improve on any sort of problem, and you also have the ability to test, then you're 100% able to solve that problem, and there's a 100% chance that it is solved. So any of these sorts of problems, just think in terms of, are they able to be iterated and improved upon? And problems that you can't do that are going to be very difficult problems to solve, and that would be something that's going to require a bit more creativity. But if you can iterate and improve, then even if you start knowing absolutely nothing and you're acting randomly, given enough time, you'll eventually find some solution that works. But anyway, I hope this all was enjoyable. I had a fun time here on Twitch. I thought that was pretty fun. And when the Andrew Yang, Ben Shapiro video comes out, I'll be analyzing that, and hopefully it will all work just as well as this did with my paint. It's a little bit different because then I have to hear, and I'm still learning. So we'll see how it goes. I think it's beyond the atmosphere if Kessler syndrome is triggered. We'll see. We'll see if Kessler syndrome is triggered. That's what I thought it was. I wanted to make sure, but just for those who were like me, what's Kessler syndrome? So Kessler syndrome, that's what I thought it was, is when the density of objects in low Earth orbit is high enough that collisions between objects called a cascade, where each collision, yada, yada, yada. So Kessler syndrome is the idea that there's just too much stuff here in this low Earth orbit that it becomes impossible to leave. And that's why I'm glad you brought that up. That's why this asteroid capture and retrieval system would be so important to get down pat. Because if you're able to capture an asteroid, you're able to deal with objects in low Earth orbit, because that's going to be a problem given enough time, even if we never leave Earth, just because we've already not perfected, but we already have the ability to send things into low Earth orbit. Given enough time, that's going to be something that's an issue anyway. So the faster we can get into space and the faster we can solve that problem, hopefully there's an economically viable way to do that, but being able to capture the objects in low Earth orbit is going to be an absolute necessity. I agree. And that's going to be something that corporations are going to have to take, into account. And that's why being able to station on the moon is going to be so important, because if you think about if you don't station on the moon and you have different corporations and different companies operating in Mars, operating in asteroids, operating in low Earth orbit on tourism expeditions, whatever it is that they end up doing, having people flying into Earth from all these different angles may not be possible, because you're going to need a global FAA, right? You're going to need some sort of global organization to handle all of that. And it's going to be absolute chaos. But if you can standardize that back and forth from the moon to Earth, you solve a lot of your problems. Especially once you have enough satellites and you're able to map all the different objects, that could cause some problem. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Being able to distinguish all the different objects in the low Earth orbit is going to be absolutely important, whether we're in space or not. Whether we're going to the moon a bunch or not, being able to deal with all these objects is going to be important. But that's definitely something that can be iterated and improved on again, because you can find what works and what doesn't work. You can find if your system for capturing, let's just call them all asteroids, but space debris, satellites, whatever. You can find what methods work and what don't work. Maybe a giant net and then you pull it in. Maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe just being able to shoot it off into space and shoot it towards Jupiter or something. Maybe that works. Maybe it doesn't work. But having some way to test different solutions and having market forces influence those sorts of decisions, because it has to be economically viable, right? You can't spend $1 billion to get one little thing out of the low Earth orbit. You need it to be repeatable, you need it to be scalable, and you need to have some sort of regulation, some way to police the litter in between Earth and the moon. Let's see here, point here, in between here. Being able to police that area and this low Earth orbit area is going to be vitally important. But it's definitely something that's possible. Definitely something that's possible. Because once you have the ability to get to the moon and back, once you're able to master that spacefaring capability, getting those objects seems more like a problem that's just waiting to be solved. So it's an engineering problem with an engineering solution. But there is one more point that I want to talk about, and that is that this might lead to Earth having I won't say one world government, but there will be a one world governing body, meaning that there is going to have to be some sort of organization, especially when Mars gets more populated. There's going to have to be some sort of organization that sets the boundaries, sets the treaties, sets the rules, sets the regulations for Earth in relation to people and things in outer space. Just for practicality purposes, just to make things easier. Because what if you want to bring something into Earth? What do you have to negotiate with all the different countries that you might land in? Do you have to negotiate with all the different countries about the product that you're bringing in? Because it's in outer space, maybe maybe you're flying over Canadian airspace to get to the United States. There's all these different issues that are going to arise, issues that we can't even think about right now. And having one place to go to is going to be probably important. And I don't know if that leads to a one world government, but if you start having humans on different planets and different worlds, then you start to think it might be easier to negotiate with one governing body than 200, or maybe even just 7. One's easier than 7, the 7 big UN nation states, right? So being able to do that is going to be important. Anyway, we're past the 20-minute mark that I normally do on the Periscopes. Can't wait for the other videos, and I hope this went well. I hope you all enjoyed this, and thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for the people watching on Twitch, and thank you to all the YouTube viewers. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye. Wait, what is that?